The cold water stole her breath as Bethany Hughes plunged beneath the churning surface of Rattlesnake Creek, her wedding dress billowing around her like a spectral cloud in the murky depths. Just moments before, she had been standing on the wooden bridge, ready to begin her new life, when the violent shove from behind sent her toppling over the edge and into the raging waters swollen by 3 days of relentless spring rain. Yancey Zimmerman saw it happen from 50 yards away. He'd been riding toward town after 2 months on the cattle drive, his stallion Diablo picking a careful path along the muddy trail that paralleled the usually docile creek. The flash of white caught his eye, first a bride in her wedding finery standing on the bridge, then the dark figure that approached from behind. Even at this distance, he recognized the aggressive posture, saw the deliberate thrust of hands against the woman's back. Her scream pierced the air before the water silenced it. Without hesitation, Yancey dug his heels into Diablo's flanks, racing toward the bridge as he simultaneously shed his duster and gun belt. He leaped from the saddle while the horse was still moving, his boots hitting the slick mud of the creek bank. The figure who had pushed the woman was already fleeing across the bridge and disappearing into the trees on the far side. No time to give chase. The white fabric was already being swept downstream, occasionally revealing a pale arm or flash of golden hair as the bride fought against the current. Yancey dove headlong into the frigid water, the cold shocking his system as he struck out with powerful strokes toward the struggling woman. Bethany's lungs burned. The heavy fabric of her wedding dress dragged her downward as the swift current tumbled her body like a rag doll. Her fingers clawed at the water, seeking purchase where there was none. This wasn't how it was supposed to end, not on what should have been the happiest day of her life. She'd only stepped onto the bridge for a moment alone, a quiet breath, before walking to the church where Walter Simmons waited to make her his wife. Now the creek was claiming her, pulling her into its muddy embrace. Then strong arms encircled her waist, a solid presence at her back. She was being drawn upward, breaking the surface with a desperate gasp that filled her starving lungs with sweet air. "I've got you," a deep voice rasped in her ear. "Stop struggling. Let me get us to shore." Bethany went limp in her rescuer's arms, trusting this stranger as he fought against the current, his breathing labored but determined. She caught glimpses of a strong jaw, dark hair plastered to his forehead, and eyes the color of whiskey focused intently on the approaching bank. With one final surge of effort, Yancey heaved them both onto the muddy shore, collapsing onto his back with the bride sprawled across his chest. For several moments, they simply lay there, both breathing heavily, the sound of the rushing creek providing a constant reminder of what had nearly happened. "Thank you," Bethany finally whispered, her voice trembling as she pushed herself up to look at her rescuer. Water dripped from her golden hair onto his face as their eyes met. "Are you hurt, madam?" Yancey asked, acutely aware of her slight weight against him, the delicate scent of lavender somehow persisting despite their dunking. "No, I don't think so." She moved to stand, but her sodden skirts tangled around her legs and she fell back against him with a small cry. "Easy now," Yancey said, gently shifting her to the side so he could stand. Once on his feet, he reached down and lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. Bethany's arms instinctively wrapped around his neck. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "Not in that dress, you can't," Yancey replied, already trudging up the bank toward where Diablo waited, reins trailing. "And not before we get you warm and dry. You're shaking like aspen leaves in October." Only then did Bethany realize she was indeed trembling violently, her teeth chattering. "Someone pushed me," she said, the reality of what had happened beginning to settle in. "Someone tried to kill me." Yancey's jaw tightened. "I saw, couldn't make out who it was from where I was riding." "Man or woman?" "I didn't see them. I was looking at the water, thinking." She trailed off, remembering her doubts about the impending marriage, doubts she'd stepped onto the bridge to contemplate. "I never heard them approach." "Well, whoever it was is long gone now," Yancey said, reaching his horse. With impressive strength, he managed to lift her onto the saddle while maintaining his balance on the slippery ground. He swung up behind her, his chest warm against her back as he reached around to take the reins. We need to get you somewhere safe and warm. I assume you're from Cottonwood Springs. Bethany nodded, suddenly aware of how improper their position was, a soaking wet bride pressed against a stranger's chest, his arms encircling her to hold the reins. Yet propriety seemed far less important than the safety his solid presence provided. I'm Bethany Hughes, she said, then corrected herself. Almost Bethany Simmons. Today was my wedding day. Yancey Zimmerman, he replied, urging Diablo forward. And I'd say your wedding might need a slight postponement, Miss Hughes. As they rode toward town, Bethany found herself wondering who would want her dead, and whether her mysterious rescuer had appeared just in time by mere coincidence or by some greater design of fate. Cottonwood Springs bustled with activity as Yancey guided Diablo down the main street, the horses' hooves splashing through puddles left by the recent deluge. Heads turned at the sight of a drenched bride riding double with an equally sodden cowboy. Whispers erupted in their wake. The doctor's office is just ahead, Bethany said, pointing to a whitewashed building with a small sign in the window. Dr. Patterson can help us. You sure you don't want me to take you straight to your family? Yancey asked, slowing the horse. Bethany hesitated. The church is 3 streets over. Everyone will be waiting there, wondering where I am. But I can't face them like this, not yet, not until I understand what happened. Yancey nodded and dismounted outside the doctor's office, then reached up to help Bethany down. Her legs buckled as her feet touched the ground, and he caught her against him, one arm firmly around her waist. Sorry, she murmured, face flushing. I thought I was steadier. Near drowning will do that to a person, Yancey said, his voice gentler than his rough appearance suggested. Lean on me. Together they made their way into the doctor's office, leaving a trail of water on the polished wooden floor. Dr. Patterson, a silver-haired man with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression, looked up from his desk and immediately jumped to his feet. Good heavens, Miss Hughes. What on earth has happened? You're supposed to be getting married right now. Someone pushed her off the bridge at Rattlesnake Creek, Yancey explained before Bethany could speak. Nearly drowned her. I pulled her out, but she needs looking after. Pushed, doctor. Patterson's bushy eyebrows shot up as he ushered them into an examination room. Are you certain? Who would do such a thing? That's what I'd like to know, Bethany said, shivering despite the warmth of the room. Let's get you both dry first, the doctor said practically. I'll have Mrs. Patterson bring some spare clothes, and someone needs to inform the wedding party what's happened. I'll ride to the church, Yancey offered. No, Bethany's hand shot out, gripping his arm with surprising strength. Please don't leave me, not yet, I don't feel safe. Something in her eyes, fear mingled with a desperate trust, made Yancey nod. All right, I'll stay until your family arrives. Dr. Patterson went to fetch his wife and send a message to the church. Left alone, Yancey and Bethany stood in awkward silence, water pooling around their feet. Why would someone want to harm you? Yancey finally asked, keeping his voice low. Bethany sank onto a chair, her sodden dress making a squelching sound. I don't know, I truly don't. I've lived in Cottonwood Springs my whole life. I teach at the schoolhouse. I haven't an enemy in the world, at least, I didn't think I did. Yancey studied her with those whiskey-colored eyes that seemed to see right through her. What about your betrothed? This Simmons fellow, could he have enemies? Walter, Bethany shook her head. He owns the mercantile. He's respected, successful. She paused, something flickering across her face. But, Yancey prompted, it's nothing, just silly nerves. She looked down at her ruined wedding dress, once pristine white, now stained with creek mud. Walter is a good man, steady, reliable. Yancey noticed she didn't say loving or passionate, but it wasn't his place to comment on that. Where have you been riding from, Mr. Zimmerman? Bethany asked, clearly changing the subject. Texas. Bringing a herd up to Montana. Stopped in these parts to visit an old friend before continuing north. So you're just passing through, Bethany said, something like disappointment in her voice. Before Yancey could respond, the door burst open and a portly man in a rumpled wedding suit rushed in, his face flushed with exertion and alarm. Bethany, my dear, what's happened? They're saying someone tried to kill you. Walter Simmons was not what Yancey had expected. Nearly 20 years older than Bethany, with thinning hair and small eyes set too close together, He didn't seem like the type of man who would win the heart of the golden-haired beauty before him. "Walter," Bethany said, rising to her feet, "I'm all right, thanks to Mr. Zimmerman here." Walter barely spared Yancey a glance. "We must get you home immediately. Everyone is in an uproar. The wedding will have to wait," Dr. Patterson said firmly, returning with his wife who carried a bundle of dry clothing. "Miss Hughes has had a terrible shock. She needs rest, not a ceremony." Of course," Walter agreed quickly, though Yancey detected a flash of annoyance cross the man's face. "I'll take her home to her father's house right away." "I'd like to know who pushed her first," Yancey interjected, drawing Walter's attention at last. "Pushed her? Surely she slipped. The bridge is treacherous after rain." "No," Bethany said firmly. "Someone pushed me, Walter. I felt their hands on my back." Walter frowned. "Who would do such a thing?" "That's what the sheriff needs to determine," Yancey said. "I'll go fetch him while the doctor tends to Miss Hughes." "That won't be necessary," Walter said quickly. "I'll speak to Sheriff Jenkins myself once Bethany is safely home." Something in the man's tone raised Yancey's hackles. He exchanged a glance with Bethany, who seemed equally perturbed by her fiancé's reaction. "I think Mr. Zimmerman is right," Bethany said carefully. "This was a deliberate attempt on my life. The sheriff should be informed immediately." Walter's face darkened momentarily before he composed himself. "Of course, my dear, whatever you think best, but please let me take you home now." Mrs. Patterson stepped forward. "If you gentlemen would step out, I'll help Miss Hughes change into something dry." Reluctantly, Yancey left the room with Walter and the doctor. In the outer office, an uncomfortable silence fell between the three men. "I understand I owe you my gratitude, Mr. Zimmerman," Walter finally said, extending his hand, "for saving my bride." Yancey shook the offered hand, noting the softness of the merchant's palm against his own calloused one. "Anyone would have done the same. Perhaps, but it was you who was there, and for that I am thankful." Walter's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Are you staying in town long?" "Just passing through," Yancey replied, studying the older man. "Though I might stay until we figure out who tried to drown your bride on her wedding day." Walter's smile tightened. "I'm sure it was just some drifter. Cottonwood Springs is a peaceful town otherwise. Peaceful towns often hide the deepest secrets," Yancey remarked. Walter opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted as the door to the examination room opened and Bethany emerged, now dressed in a simple blue dress that belonged to Mrs. Patterson. Though too large for her slender frame, she somehow managed to look both vulnerable and determined. "Doctor Patterson says I should rest, but first I want to speak with Sheriff Jenkins," she announced, her gaze moving to Yancey as if seeking his approval. "I'll fetch him," Yancey offered. "No need," came a gruff voice from the doorway. Sheriff Jenkins, a barrel-chested man with a gray mustache that drooped past his chin, stepped into the office. "Word travels fast in Cottonwood Springs. What's this about someone pushing you into the creek, Miss Hughes?" For the next half hour, Bethany recounted her experience while the sheriff took notes in a small leather-bound book. Yancey added his perspective, describing what he'd witnessed from his position on the trail. Throughout the interview, Walter hovered anxiously, frequently suggesting that Bethany was too upset to continue or that they should postpone further questions until she'd rested. "I'll look into this," Sheriff Jenkins promised when they'd finished, "but I won't lie to you, Miss Hughes. Without knowing who pushed you or why, this investigation might not go far." "I understand," Bethany said quietly, "but I need to know who wanted me dead. In the meantime," the sheriff continued, "I suggest you stay somewhere safe. Whoever did this might try again." "She'll stay with me at the Mercantile," Walter said immediately. "I have rooms above the store. I'll protect her." Bethany frowned. "Walter, that wouldn't be proper. We're not married yet." "Under the circumstances, propriety seems less important than safety," Walter argued. "She can stay at my father's house," Bethany countered. "You know he has a loaded shotgun and sleeps like a cat." The sheriff nodded. "That seems wise. Old man Hughes is not someone I'd want to cross, especially when it comes to his daughter's safety." Walter clearly wasn't pleased but conceded with a tight nod. "Very well, I'll escort you there now." "I'd like to speak with Mr. Zimmerman alone first," Bethany said, surprising everyone in the room. He saved my life. I owe him my proper thanks. Walter's face flushed, but he stepped back. Of course, I'll wait outside with the buggy. When the others had filed out, leaving Bethany and Yancey alone in the doctor's office, she stepped closer to him, her blue eyes intense. You don't believe it was a random drifter any more than I do, she said quietly. Yancey shook his head. No, madam, I don't. Whoever pushed you knew you'd be on that bridge, knew when your wedding was. That suggests someone local. That's what I fear. She took a deep breath. Mr. Zimmerman, I have no right to ask this of you, but would you consider staying in Cottonwood Springs a few days longer? At least until we discover who tried to kill me. I was already planning on it, Yancey admitted. Something about this doesn't sit right with me, and I don't like leaving puzzles unsolved. Relief washed over Bethany's face. Thank you. I know Walter thinks he can protect me, but… You don't trust him? Yancey asked bluntly. No, it's not that, Bethany said quickly, though her eyes betrayed uncertainty. It's just, Walter is a businessman, not a fighter, and whoever pushed me was strong, determined. Yancey nodded, understanding the unspoken fear. I'll keep watch. Where can I find you? My father's farm is just north of town, the house with the red barn and the white fence. She hesitated, then impulsively reached out to squeeze his hand. Thank you again, for saving me, for believing me. Just doing what needed doing, Yancey said, uncomfortable with her gratitude, yet strangely affected by the warmth of her hand on his. After Bethany left with Walter, Yancey made his way to the sheriff's office, determined to learn more about the people of Cottonwood Springs, particularly a certain merchant, who seemed oddly unconcerned that someone had tried to murder his bride. The next 3 days passed in a blur of investigation and growing tension. Yancey took a room at the town's only hotel, a modest establishment called the Cottonwood Inn, and spent his days asking careful questions around town while keeping a distant eye on Bethany's movements. What he learned troubled him deeply. Walter Simmons had been married once before to a young woman from a neighboring town who had died under mysterious circumstances 2 years earlier. The official story was that she'd fallen down the stairs in the Mercantile, but several townspeople whispered that there had been bruises on her body that couldn't be explained by a fall. More concerning still, Walter's business was apparently struggling despite his outward appearance of prosperity. He owed substantial debts to several suppliers, and rumors suggested he was counting on Bethany's inheritance, a modest but valuable piece of land left to her by her mother, to save him from financial ruin. On the afternoon of the third day, Yancey was sitting in the hotel restaurant when Sheriff Jenkins slid into the chair across from him, his expression grim. Found something you might be interested in, Zimmerman, the lawman said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. That bridge where Miss Hughes was pushed, Simmons owns the property on both sides, has for years. Yancey set down his coffee cup. Meaning he knows every inch of that area. Including which parts of the bank are easiest to scramble up after, say, pushing someone into the water and needing to make a quick escape. That's not proof, Yancey pointed out, though his suspicions were hardening into certainty. No, but this might be interesting to you. The sheriff pulled a folded document from his pocket. Insurance policy on Miss Hughes's life, taken out 2 months ago by Walter Simmons. Pays double in case of accidental death. Yancey's blood ran cold. Does she know about this? Not according to the clerk at the insurance office. Simmons told him it was a wedding surprise. Planning for their future, he said. Some surprise, Yancey muttered. Have you confronted him? Not yet. Wanted to gather more evidence first. But I thought you should know, seeing as how you've appointed yourself Miss Hughes's unofficial protector. Yancey ignored the jibe. I need to warn her. Already sent my deputy out to the Hughes farm with instructions to bring her to my office. Figured it would be safer to talk there. The sheriff stood up. Meet us in an hour. But when Yancey arrived at the sheriff's office later that afternoon, he found Jenkins alone, pacing anxiously. She wasn't there, the lawman explained before Yancey could ask. According to her father, Simmons came by around noon and convinced her to move up the wedding. They're getting married today, soon as the minister can be fetched. Old man Hughes wasn't happy about it, but Bethany insisted. Yancey felt a chill run down his spine. Where? Simmons's house behind the Mercantile. Private ceremony, just family. "We need to stop it," Yancey said, already moving toward the door. "Hold on," the sheriff called after him. "We don't have proof he pushed her, just circumstantial evidence." "We can't just barge in," but Yancey was already gone, striding purposefully toward the mercantile on the far end of town. His instincts, honed by years on the frontier, were screaming that Bethany was in danger. Simmons had failed to kill her once. He wouldn't fail again. The mercantile was closed when Yancey reached it. A sign in the window announcing "closed for private celebration" in flowing script. He circled around to the back, where a modest two-story house stood connected to the store by a covered walkway. Through the window, he could see a small gathering in the parlor. Bethany in a simple cream-colored dress, her father looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best, Walter beaming as the minister read from a Bible. No sign of danger, yet Yancey couldn't shake his sense of foreboding. He was about to approach the back door when a movement at the upstairs window caught his eye. A woman's face appeared briefly, not Bethany's, but someone older with a pinched expression. She seemed to be watching the ceremony with intense displeasure before disappearing from view. Trusting his instincts, Yancey found the servant's entrance and slipped inside, making his way up the back stairs as quietly as his boots would allow. The upstairs hallway was dimly lit, with several doors leading off it. From behind one, he heard muttering. "Think he can replace my sister with that simpering schoolteacher. Should have drowned when I pushed her. Finish what I started." Yancey eased the door open to find a middle-aged woman with faded blonde hair arranging items on a tea tray, including a small vial she was carefully emptying into one of the cups. "That's not sugar you're adding, madam," he said quietly. The woman whirled around, the empty vial dropping from her fingers to shatter on the floor. "Who are you? How dare you enter a private residence?" "I'm the man who pulled Bethany Hughes from Rattlesnake Creek after you tried to drown her," Yancey replied, stepping into the room and blocking the doorway. "And I'm guessing you're Walter Simmons's sister-in-law, his first wife's sister." The woman's face contorted with hatred. "Margaret was worth 10 of that golden-haired witch downstairs. Walter was our family's salvation. Then Margaret died, and instead of marrying me as he should have, he chose that child." "So you tried to kill Bethany," Yancey said, pieces falling into place. "Not Walter. Walter is weak." The woman spat. "He actually loves her, can you believe it? After everything our family did for him, but without her, he'll have no choice. He'll turn to me for comfort, for support. Like he did after Margaret died," Yancey guessed. "Only it didn't work out that way." "He just needed time," the woman insisted, eyes wild. "But then he met her, and suddenly I was invisible again, always invisible. Not anymore." She lunged suddenly, not toward Yancey but toward the window, clearly intending to call out a warning or raise an alarm. Yancey moved faster, grabbing her arm and pulling her away from the window, but not before she let out a piercing scream. Downstairs, the ceremony halted at the sound. Footsteps pounded on the stairs, and moments later, Walter burst into the room, followed closely by Sheriff Jenkins, who had apparently arrived just in time. "Martha, what's happening?" Walter demanded, taking in the scene with confusion, his former sister-in-law struggling in the grip of the cowboy who had saved his bride, a shattered vial on the floor beside a tea tray. "She poisoned the tea," Yancey explained grimly, "and she's the one who pushed Bethany into the creek." "No," Walter whispered, the color draining from his face as he looked at the woman he'd welcomed into his home. "Martha, tell me that's not true." But Martha's composure had cracked completely. "She stole you from us, from me. Margaret would still be alive if not for you and your wandering eye. You owed us." "I think I have all I need to make an arrest," Sheriff Jenkins said, stepping forward with handcuffs. As the sheriff led the still ranting Martha away, Bethany appeared in the doorway, her father hovering protectively behind her. "Yancey," she said, her voice small. "What's happening?" Walter sank onto a chair, his head in his hands. "Martha killed Margaret," he said hollowly, "and she tried to kill you too. All this time I thought Margaret's death was my fault, an accident during an argument we'd had, but it was Martha." Bethany moved to comfort Walter, but her eyes remained on Yancey, filled with questions and something deeper, something that made his heart beat faster despite the circumstances. In the days that followed, Martha confessed to everything, pushing Bethany into the creek, poisoning her sister during what was supposed to be a reconciliation between the married couple, and planning to poison Bethany on her wedding day. Her obsession with Walter and resentment of the women he loved had driven her to madness. Walter, devastated by the revelations and the knowledge that he'd unknowingly harbored his first wife's killer, withdrew the marriage offer to Bethany. "You deserve better than a man with such poor judgment," he told her sadly. "And I need time to grieve properly for Margaret, now that I know the truth." Bethany accepted his decision with grace and perhaps a hint of relief that she didn't quite understand herself. The postponed wedding became a canceled one, and Cottonwood Springs buzzed with gossip about the shocking events. Through it all, Yancey remained in town, telling himself he was just making sure the case was properly resolved before continuing his journey north. But each evening found him on the porch of the Hughes farmhouse, sharing coffee with Bethany as the summer twilight deepened around them. "You'll be leaving soon," Bethany said one evening, 3 weeks after the creek incident. It wasn't a question. Yancey nodded, watching the fireflies begin to rise from the meadow beyond the fence. "The herd will be waiting in Montana. My business partner isn't known for his patience." "I understand," Bethany said softly, though the disappointment in her voice suggested otherwise. "I've been thinking," Yancey said carefully, setting down his coffee cup. "The cattle business is growing. We'll need a proper office soon, somewhere central. Cottonwood Springs has a lot to recommend it." Bethany's eyes widened. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying I'd like to come back." "After this drive is done." Yancey turned to face her fully. "If I had a reason to." "What kind of reason would you need?" Bethany asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering with words, Yancey leaned forward and gently pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief, but held the promise of more to come if she wanted it. When he pulled back, Bethany's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright in the fading light. "I think that's a very good reason," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "It might take me a couple of months to settle things in Montana," Yancey warned her. "And I'm not a rich man like Walter, just a cowboy with ambitions." "I never wanted riches," Bethany said, reaching out to take his hand. "I just wanted someone who would dive into a flooded creek for me without hesitation." Yancey laughed, entwining his fingers with hers. "That I can promise." 3 months later, as autumn painted the trees around Cottonwood Springs in shades of gold and crimson, Yancey Zimmerman returned as promised. This time, when Bethany Hughes stood on the bridge over Rattlesnake Creek, now calm and gentle in the crisp October air, it was to meet her future, not to escape her past. And when Yancey dropped to one knee on that very bridge, offering a simple silver ring and his heart, Bethany said yes without hesitation or doubt. Because sometimes, the most unexpected currents lead to exactly where you're meant to be, in the arms of someone who would brave any water to bring you safely to shore.